Sodom by the Sea. Coney Island on fire, 1899.
M-E-T-H-O-D, man. M-E-T-H-O-D, man.
10 minutes before the clock struck 3 on May 26, 1899, policeman Thomas Lynch discovered a fire in the Coney Island home of Mrs. Nellie Seyfried. As this fire of unknown origin quickly spread across the beach, a series of missteps led the problem to worsen. The firemen were notified too late, as an incorrectly fitting key to the firebox delayed the alarm. When they arrived, their 300-foot-long hose was unable to reach the nearest fire hydrant, which sat idly 1,500 feet away from the burning beachfront. The fire department's fleet cabs were unable to park on the sandy shore. By the time the flames were extinguished, ambulances treated 17 people who gazed at rubble that cost nearly $500,000 in damages. For Coney Island's critics, the fire symbolized the moral degradation of the city, for this pleasure center was as contested as it was beloved. Regarding historical context, Chicago's 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition not only set the stage for pleasure centers like Coney Island, but the fair also revealed how the urban elite were the strongest critics of society's new forms of leisure. In 1894, the British journalist William T. Stead wrote If Christ Came to Chicago, and he came to the conclusion that Christ would have viewed Chicago as a city removed of moral values. Quote, "This vast and heterogeneous community, which has been collected together from all quarters of the known world, knows only one common bond. Its members came here to make money. They are staying here to make money. The quest of the almighty dollar is their holy grail," end quote. This elite sentiment applied to Coney Island at the turn of the century, where entrepreneurs made their money not in industry, but rather in amusement. This paper briefly investigates whether the 1899 Coney Island fire provided a better opportunity for entrepreneurs to rebuild or for critics to reform. Based on the plethora of New York Times articles revolving around the so-called Coney Island problem, the 1899 Coney Island fire and the site's quick recovery proved a challenge for the most vocal moralists from the urban elite. The 1899 fire was but a small hiccup for growing businesses, and the pleas to think of the children continued through the turn of the 20th century. Coney Island was a significant battleground for the soul of New York City, especially in the late Gilded Age and early Progressive era. In the 1890s, the upper classes of New York City enjoyed Coney Island as a place for amusement. However, urban elites were also the pleasure center's greatest critics. The urban elite coined the phrase, the Coney Island problem, to express their outrage at the moral degradation of the city as a whole, with Brighton Beach as its most visible symptom. In an 1899 opinion piece from the New York Times, the columnist was baffled by the boardwalk barkers, Cuban idiots, beer halls, and museums. Quote, "But where, in the wide whole of greater New York, can one find a place undisturbed by blatant vulgarity? All the moral scum of the city keeps the shore as its garbage heaps the beach," end quote. To this editorialist, Coney Island drew in a particular crowd who wanted to see so-called Oriental dances and drink unlimited beer. He continued his moral panic with a plea to think of the children whose teachers have brought them to Coney Island, stating that only when reform is done, quote, "can a teacher speak to his pupils of the sea without a guilty feeling that in doing so he is implying beer, Wienerwurst, and Little Egypt," end quote. The fears of this moralist have a strong connection to foreignness and otherness, as German foods, Middle Eastern dances, and Latin American peoples made up this allegedly discolored district. we return to the day after the fire that nearly left the entire district eviscerated. The wreckage was widespread. Over 60 buildings destroyed, none of them bathing houses. Henry Henderson was the biggest loser, losing $100,000 with no insurance, while Louis Staunch's largest dancing pavilion survived, just in time for open season. Coney Island quickly returned to a state of normalcy, and 20,000 visitors returned to the businesses that remained on the next day. Not even a fire could erase the perceived Coney Island problem, as moral reformers remained hell-bent against perceived indecencies. Coney Island's critics remained steadfast against the obscenity, and the fire seemed to have little impact on the continuation of this public debate. The temporary resolution of the Coney Island problem after the turn of the 20th century focused on urban practicalities more so than on suspected immoralities. 3 high-ranking men in the New York City government took the charge of Coney Isle. Business owners informed these 3 men's understanding of the Coney Island problem, receiving complaints about pools of stagnant water and vegetable matter decaying on the boardwalks. They denied that they rode the loop-de-loop, the Barrel of Love, and the Flip-Flap Railway, but they learned a lot on their visit. "We did not loop the loops or turn the flip-flaps," said Controller Kohler when they returned to Brooklyn yesterday. "The matter is a very plain one. Many complaints have been received from the property owners of Coney Island that the conditions of the place really kept thousands of patrons away. There is to be an entire change in the physical condition at Coney Island. The people are entitled to have the place in a healthy condition, and clean morally and physically. It should be distinctly understood that there is no crusade. I believe that Coney Island is a place of amusement for the people, and there should always be plenty of fun there, and it should be fast and furious." End quote. Henceforth, an interdepartmental care team maintained Coney Island was not able to take up all moral matters. However, they were able to give Coney Island the proper care that only a city government could provide. The 1899 fire at Coney Island was unable to destroy Sunday fun or Friday delinquency. While moral reformers did not entirely see their way, they made their voice known, and as a consequence, the modern city cleaned up what they could. Sodom by the Sea was to be transformed at New York City's hands by the beginning of the 20th century.